I gave up my scholarship to work 2 jobs so he could focus on his engineering degree without financial stress. 5 years later, he's telling people that dating someone without ambition nearly ruined his career prospects. The acceptance letters arrived the same week in April of our senior year, both of us running to each other's lockers with envelopes that represented everything we had worked toward throughout high school. Tyler had been accepted to the State University's competitive engineering program with partial scholarship, while I had received a full academic scholarship to the liberal arts college, where I planned to study education and eventually become a teacher. Before we get into the part that still hurts to tell, let us know where you're watching from and hit subscribe so you don't miss more deep, raw stories like this. We celebrated that night at the diner where I worked part-time, sharing dreams about college life and the future we would build together after graduation. Tyler's enthusiasm about his engineering program was infectious, describing the research opportunities, internship possibilities, and career prospects that would follow his degree. My own excitement about studying education felt smaller by comparison, but equally meaningful. The chance to make a difference in children's lives while building a stable career that could support the family we planned to create together. But the celebration was overshadowed by growing awareness of the financial realities that would make pursuing our respective dreams simultaneously nearly impossible. Tyler's partial scholarship covered tuition, but not housing, meal plans, textbooks, or the living expenses that would be necessary for someone trying to succeed in a demanding engineering program. My full scholarship was comprehensive, but required enrollment at a college 3 hours away from his university. Tyler's family situation was complicated by his father's recent unemployment and his mother's part-time work that barely covered their mortgage payments. They were proud of his acceptance to the engineering program, but couldn't provide financial support beyond emotional encouragement and occasional care packages. His academic success had been achieved despite family circumstances that offered no safety net for college expenses. My family was more stable financially, but not wealthy enough to support 2 college educations simultaneously if Tyler and I wanted to maintain our relationship through geographic proximity. The choice we faced was pursuing our individual dreams at separate institutions or finding a way to stay together while only one of us attended college full-time. The conversations about our options consumed weeks of late-night discussions about sacrifice, timing, and long-term planning that felt both mature and overwhelming for 18-year-old kids trying to balance love with practical decision-making. We explored every possibility: student loans, part-time enrollment, delayed admission, work-study programs, searching for solutions that would allow both of us to pursue our educational goals without destroying our relationship. But the mathematics were unforgiving regardless of how creatively we approached the problem. Tyler's engineering program was too demanding to allow the extensive part-time work that would be necessary to cover his living expenses. My scholarship was non-deferrable and required full-time enrollment that would preclude the kind of employment needed to support both of us financially. One of us would have to postpone college, or we would have to accept long-distance separation during the most crucial period of our relationship. The decision to sacrifice my scholarship came gradually, emerging from discussions that initially focused on temporary delay rather than permanent abandonment of my educational goals. If I could work for a year or 2 while Tyler established himself in his program, we reasoned I could reapply for scholarships and begin my own college education once his academic success had positioned him for paid internships and research opportunities. Tyler's gratitude for my willingness to consider this sacrifice was overwhelming and heartfelt, expressing amazement that someone would love him enough to postpone their own dreams for his benefit. He promised repeatedly that my sacrifice would be temporary, that his eventual success would make it possible for me to pursue education in ways that might be even better than the original scholarship opportunity. The promises Tyler made about our shared future were comprehensive and romantic, describing the life we would build together once his engineering degree opened doors to well-paying career opportunities. He would support my return to college, fund my education completely, and ensure that my temporary sacrifice would be rewarded with opportunities that exceeded what I might have achieved independently. But even as I agreed to postpone college for Tyler's benefit, there were subtle signs that his appreciation for my sacrifice was mixed with assumptions about my willingness to continue sacrificing indefinitely. He spoke about my work as temporary necessity rather than significant gift, about my educational delay as practical decision rather than romantic devotion. Tyler's excitement about college was accompanied by detailed planning that assumed my comprehensive support without acknowledging the extent of what that support would require from me personally and professionally. He needed someone to handle household responsibilities, manage finances, and provide emotional stability while he focused entirely on academic achievement that would benefit both of us eventually. My decision to decline the scholarship was finalized during a tearful conversation with the financial aid office, explaining that personal circumstances had changed, and I would no longer be able to accept the offer that had once represented everything I wanted for my future. The disappointment in my academic advisor's voice was obvious as she urged me to reconsider, warning that such opportunities rarely presented themselves twice. But Tyler's need felt more immediate and compelling than my own educational goals, which seemed flexible and deferrable in ways that his time-sensitive program acceptance didn't. Education would always be available for someone with my academic record, while his engineering opportunity required immediate commitment and comprehensive support that only I could provide. Tyler's transition to college was smooth and successful, aided by my presence in the college town, where I had found employment at a local diner that provided decent tips and flexible scheduling around his academic calendar. Living together in a small apartment near campus allowed him to focus entirely on his studies, while I managed the practical aspects of adult life that might have distracted him from academic excellence. My work at the diner was exhausting but manageable, providing enough income to cover our basic living expenses while Tyler adjusted to the demands of his engineering coursework. The customers were friendly, the management was understanding about my need for schedule flexibility, and the work felt meaningful as temporary sacrifice for a larger purpose. But Tyler's integration into university life was immediate and comprehensive, involving study groups, research opportunities, and social activities that gradually excluded me due to scheduling conflicts with my work obligations. His new friends were fellow engineering students whose lives revolved around academic achievement and career planning, creating social dynamics that made my working-class employment seem increasingly out of place. The first semester of Tyler's college experience was marked by academic success that validated every sacrifice I had made, with grades that positioned him for competitive opportunities and professor recognition that opened doors to research positions and networking connections. His progress was rapid and impressive, demonstrating both his intellectual capability and the benefits of having comprehensive support that eliminated financial stress. But Tyler's success was accompanied by subtle changes in how he viewed our arrangement and my role in his academic achievement. The gratitude remained present but felt less spontaneous, expressed more often when he needed reassurance about my continued support rather than appreciation for support already provided. Tyler's descriptions of his university experiences began excluding references to our shared living situation or my work, presenting himself to classmates as independent student rather than someone whose academic success was enabled through external support. The omission felt strategic rather than accidental, designed to maintain social credibility among peers who might view our arrangement as unconventional. My own social life contracted dramatically as Tyler's expanded, with work schedules that eliminated opportunities for developing friendships or maintaining relationships with high school classmates who had dispersed to various colleges and career paths. My identity was becoming entirely defined by my role as Tyler's support system rather than my own interests and goals. The isolation was compounded by the college town environment, where most social activities were designed for students rather than working residents, creating limited opportunities for someone whose schedule revolved around restaurant shifts and whose social energy was depleted by the demands of supporting someone else's academic career. But Tyler would come home from successful days on campus filled with excitement about his classes, research opportunities, and the bright future that was taking shape through his academic achievements. His enthusiasm was infectious and validating, making every hour of work and every abandoned personal goal feel worthwhile as investment in something meaningful and permanent. Tyler would thank me for making his education possible, holding me close while describing the career opportunities that were already beginning to emerge through his academic excellence and networking success. The life we were building together felt significant and collaborative, temporary sacrifice that would yield permanent benefits for both of us. 6 months into Tyler's college experience, I had settled into a routine that felt sustainable and purposeful, working to support someone whose success would eventually support both of us in ways that exceeded what either of us could have achieved independently. The scholarship I had abandoned seemed like small price to pay for the shared future we were creating through collaborative effort and mutual sacrifice. I thought I was investing in our future together, building something meaningful through temporary sacrifice that would benefit both of us once Tyler's education was complete. I didn't understand that I was funding someone else's individual success while ensuring my own permanent disadvantage, that my sacrifice would become his shame rather than his gratitude. The woman who had given up her scholarship to work 2 jobs would eventually become the limitation he needed to overcome rather than the foundation that had made his success possible. 2 years into Tyler's engineering program, my life had been completely restructured around his academic schedule and needs, while I worked morning shifts at the diner and evening shifts at a retail store to cover all our living expenses, tuition gaps, and the increasing costs of his educational advancement. The woman who had postponed college to support his dreams had become invisible labor that made his success possible, while my own goals disappeared beneath the daily grind of survival employment. The morning shift at Mel's Diner began at 5 a.m., serving coffee and breakfast to construction workers, truck drivers, and early commuters who left decent tips, but required the kind of cheerful energy that felt increasingly difficult to summon after working until 10 p.m. the previous night. The work was physically demanding, requiring hours of standing, lifting, and moving at pace that left my feet aching and my back stiff by the time Tyler was waking up for his first class. Tyler's schedule revolved around optimal learning conditions, sufficient sleep, proper nutrition, and time for both focused study and social activities that would support his academic success and professional networking. My schedule revolved around funding those conditions while managing household responsibilities that Tyler couldn't handle due to his comprehensive commitment to academic excellence. The evening shift at the clothing store was less physically demanding but more emotionally draining, dealing with difficult customers and sales pressure while my energy was already depleted from the morning's restaurant work. The retail environment was competitive and stressful, with management that viewed part-time employees as expendable and customers who treated service workers as servants rather than people. But the combination of 2 jobs provided just enough income to cover our rent, utilities, groceries, and Tyler's educational expenses that weren't covered by his partial scholarship. The mathematics were tight and unforgiving, requiring careful budgeting and constant attention to expenses that might threaten our financial stability. Tyler's awareness of my work schedule was limited and practical, focused on how my employment affected our shared time rather than the physical and emotional toll that 60-hour work weeks were taking on my health and well-being. He would complain when I was too tired for evening conversations or weekend activities, viewing my exhaustion as obstacle to our relationship rather than inevitable result of funding his education. The social dynamics of Tyler's university experience were increasingly exclusive of my presence and perspective, involving activities and conversations that assumed academic background and financial security that I couldn't provide or relate to. His study groups met during my work hours, his social gatherings required energy I didn't have after long days of manual labor, and his intellectual discussions referenced concepts and experiences that were foreign to my working-class reality. Tyler's new friends were fellow engineering students whose lives revolved around academic achievement, career planning, and social activities funded by family resources or student loans that would be manageable with their projected post-graduation incomes. They spoke casually about internship opportunities, study abroad programs, and career prospects that assumed financial flexibility and educational credentials I lacked. When Tyler occasionally included me in social events with his university peers, the conversations inevitably focused on academic subjects, career ambitions, and shared experiences that excluded me systematically rather than intentionally. The students' assumptions about background and opportunities made my working-class employment seem temporary and embarrassing rather than essential and admirable. Tyler's discomfort with these social dynamics was obvious but misdirected, focusing on my inability to contribute to intellectual conversations rather than his failure to acknowledge the comprehensive support that made his participation in those conversations possible. He would suggest that I was selling myself short, that I should try to engage more actively with his friends despite obvious differences in education and experience. But the suggestion that I should somehow transcend my working-class reality to fit into Tyler's academic social circle ignored the practical constraints that made such transcendence impossible. I was working 12-hour days to fund his education, leaving no time or energy for the kind of intellectual development that might have made university social life accessible. Tyler's academic success during his sophomore year was exceptional, earning recognition from professors, research opportunities with graduate students, and networking connections that were positioning him for prestigious internships and career opportunities. His progress validated every sacrifice I was making, while simultaneously creating social distances that were becoming difficult to bridge. The research position Tyler secured with a prominent engineering professor was unpaid but prestigious, requiring additional time commitment that reduced his availability for household responsibilities and increased his need for comprehensive support from me. The opportunity was valuable for his career development but created additional pressure on my already strained schedule. Tyler's enthusiasm about his research work was infectious and validating, describing breakthrough discoveries and innovative solutions that made his academic achievement feel meaningful and important. But his descriptions of university life increasingly excluded references to our shared living situation or my role in making his success possible, presenting himself as independent student rather than someone whose achievements were enabled through external sacrifice. The omission felt strategic rather than accidental when Tyler described his circumstances to professors, fellow students, and professional contacts who might influence his career prospects. Acknowledging comprehensive support from a working girlfriend might have undermined perceptions of his independence and self-reliance that were valued in academic and professional environments. My own exhaustion from working 2 jobs was becoming chronic and concerning, affecting my physical health, emotional stability, and ability to maintain the enthusiastic support that Tyler needed for optimal academic performance. The constant fatigue was making routine tasks feel overwhelming and social interactions feel forced and difficult. When I mentioned feeling overwhelmed by the demands of supporting our household while Tyler focused on his studies, his response was immediate concern about how my stress might affect his academic performance, rather than recognition that my stress was an inevitable result of the arrangement we had chosen. Tyler would suggest that I needed better time management, more positive attitude, or different approach to work-life balance that would allow me to provide necessary support without experiencing negative consequences that might affect our relationship or his studies. The advice was well-intentioned, but ignored the mathematical impossibility of working 60 hours per week without experiencing exhaustion. The first major conflict in our relationship occurred when I missed Tyler's presentation at a student research symposium because I couldn't get time off from both jobs during the same evening. My absence felt like betrayal to Tyler, who had been expecting my presence and support during an important academic milestone that validated months of research work. Tyler's disappointment about my absence was expressed as hurt about my lack of commitment to his success, rather than understanding about the work obligations that made my presence impossible. He seemed to forget that my work was what had made his research possible in the first place, that my absence was a direct result of the financial support I was providing. But the missed event highlighted growing tensions between Tyler's expectations for my availability and the practical demands of the employment that funded his educational opportunities. He wanted comprehensive support without understanding that providing such support required comprehensive commitment to work schedules that limited my flexibility. Tyler's suggestions for resolving this conflict focused on my need to communicate better with employers about schedule flexibility rather than his need to adjust expectations about my availability for academic events. The solution was positioned as my responsibility to manage rather than our shared challenge to address through mutual accommodation. My attempts to explain the realities of hourly employment, inflexible schedules, limited vacation time, potential job loss for unreliable attendance, were dismissed as evidence of my lack of ambition rather than acknowledgement of working-class employment constraints that Tyler had never experienced personally. The conversation revealed Tyler's growing disconnection from the practical realities of my working life and his increasing comfort with viewing my employment as obstacle to our relationship rather than foundation that made his academic success possible. My work was becoming inconvenience rather than investment, limitation rather than love. Tyler's academic achievements were generating increasing recognition from professors and peers who saw him as promising young engineer with bright career prospects, validation that felt meaningful and encouraging for both of us despite the personal costs of achieving such recognition. But Tyler's success was also creating social opportunities and professional connections that assumed background and resources I couldn't provide, making my presence at university events feel increasingly inappropriate and uncomfortable rather than supportive and celebratory. The gap between Tyler's academic world and my working reality was widening in ways that made our shared future feel less certain despite the progress we were making toward his educational goals. His success was creating distances that seemed unbridgeable rather than temporary, differences that felt permanent rather than circumstantial. 2 years into Tyler's program, I was beginning to understand that supporting someone else's educational advancement while abandoning my own might create permanent disparities rather than temporary sacrifice, that my working class employment was becoming identity rather than temporary circumstance. But Tyler was thriving academically, earning grades and recognition that positioned him for excellent career opportunities that would eventually benefit both of us. The sacrifice I was making felt worthwhile when measured against his obvious progress and the bright future that his success would provide for our shared life together. Tyler would still thank me occasionally for making his education possible, holding me close after particularly successful days and expressing gratitude for the support that allowed him to focus entirely on academic achievement. Those moments of acknowledgement made every hour of work feel meaningful despite the physical exhaustion and social isolation. I thought I was temporarily sacrificing my educational goals to invest in our shared future, that my working class employment was bridged to middle class stability rather than permanent limitation on my potential. I didn't understand that Tyler was learning to see my sacrifice as evidence of my limitations rather than proof of my love. 3 years into Tyler's engineering program, his academic success had reached levels that attracted national attention, while my existence had been reduced to invisible labor that enabled his achievements without recognition or consideration for the cumulative toll that working 70-hour weeks was taking on my physical health, mental stability, and any remaining hope for my own educational or professional advancement. Tyler's junior year brought prestigious internship opportunities with major engineering firms, research projects that were being published in academic journals, and networking connections with industry leaders who were already discussing his potential for graduate school and fast-track career advancement. His professors had begun treating him as colleague rather than student, involving him in consulting projects and conference presentations that were building his professional reputation before graduation. But Tyler's ascending academic trajectory was entirely dependent on my continued financial support, which now included not just basic living expenses, but also professional development costs like conference travel, interview clothing, and networking events that were crucial for maximizing his internship and career opportunities. The expenses kept increasing as his success created new opportunities that required additional investment. My morning shifts at the diner had expanded to include weekend doubles to accommodate Tyler's need for quiet study environment and financial resources for his professional development. The restaurant work was becoming more demanding as my seniority led to increased responsibilities without proportional pay increases, requiring earlier arrival times and later cleanup duties that extended already exhausting days. The evening retail job had been supplemented with holiday seasonal work and inventory shifts that provided necessary income, but eliminated any remaining time for rest, social activities, or personal care that might have helped me manage the stress of comprehensive employment. My schedule was structured entirely around Tyler's academic calendar and financial needs, with no consideration for my own well-being or interests. Tyler's internship with a prestigious engineering firm that summer was unpaid, but provided invaluable experience and networking opportunities that would significantly impact his post-graduation career prospects. The internship required him to relocate temporarily to another city, leaving me responsible for maintaining our apartment and covering all living expenses while he focused on professional development that would benefit his individual career rather than our shared future. The financial pressure of supporting Tyler's internship while maintaining our household independently was crushing, requiring me to take on additional work hours and explore new employment opportunities that could provide enough income to cover dual living situations. I worked extra shifts at both jobs while Tyler gained experience that would make him more attractive to employers who had no knowledge of the sacrifice that made his availability possible. Tyler's social life during his internship expanded dramatically as he connected with other interns, engineering professionals, and company executives who became important networking contacts for his future career. His descriptions of dinners, social events, and professional gatherings revealed a world of opportunities and relationships that were completely inaccessible to someone working multiple service jobs to fund basic survival. But Tyler's enthusiasm about his internship experiences was accompanied by growing discomfort with our relationship and living situation, which he was beginning to view as obstacle to his professional advancement rather than foundation that made such advancement possible. The other interns were dating fellow professionals or students from prestigious universities, creating social dynamics that made his working-class girlfriend seem inappropriate for his ascending career trajectory. Tyler's request that I not mention my jobs during phone conversations when his internship colleagues were present felt like reasonable accommodation initially, but the pattern of concealing my employment expanded to include social media, professional networking events, and any context where acknowledgement of my working-class reality might reflect poorly on his professional image. The reframing of my comprehensive sacrifice as embarrassing limitation rather than admirable devotion was gradual but systematic, with Tyler learning to view my employment as evidence of my lack of ambition rather than proof of my commitment to his success. My inability to participate in his professional social activities was interpreted as personal failing rather than practical constraint created by the work schedule that funded his opportunities. Tyler's return from his successful internship was marked by increased confidence about his career prospects and decreased appreciation for the sacrifice that had made those prospects possible. The validation he had received from engineering professionals had convinced him that his success was primarily a result of individual talent and effort rather than collaborative achievement enabled through external support. My physical health was deteriorating noticeably after 3 years of working multiple jobs with minimal time for sleep, exercise, or medical care that might have addressed the chronic pain and exhaustion that were becoming normal rather than exceptional aspects of my daily experience. The stress of financial responsibility combined with physical demands of service work was creating health problems that I couldn't afford to treat properly. Tyler's awareness of my declining health was limited and defensive, acknowledging that I seemed tired while maintaining that reducing financial support would compromise his academic success during the crucial final year of his program. My health concerns were valid but poorly timed, requiring management around his educational needs rather than immediate attention that might affect our shared goals. When I suggested that Tyler might consider part-time employment to reduce the financial pressure on me during his senior year, his response was immediate anxiety about how work obligations might affect his GPA, research productivity, and graduate school applications that were becoming increasingly important for his career trajectory. Tyler's explanation of why employment would be harmful to his academic success was technically accurate, but ignored the reality that my employment was equally harmful to my physical and mental health while being essential for his continued education. The double standard was obvious but unacknowledged, with my sacrifice being viewed as sustainable while his would be catastrophic. The friends Tyler had developed during his university experience were sophisticated and ambitious, pursuing advanced degrees, prestigious career opportunities, and social activities that required financial resources and cultural capital that were foreign to my working-class background. Their conversations assumed educational experiences and professional aspirations that made my presence feel inappropriate and uncomfortable. Tyler's increasing embarrassment about my employment became obvious during social gatherings with his academic peers, where he would introduce me vaguely as his girlfriend while avoiding specific questions about my work or educational background. The omissions felt strategic rather than protective, designed to maintain his social credibility rather than preserve my dignity. The most painful example of Tyler's growing shame about our relationship occurred during a dinner party hosted by his research advisor, where I was introduced to other students and faculty members as someone who was exploring different career options, rather than someone who was working 2 jobs to fund Tyler's education and professional development. Tyler's explanation for the misrepresentation was that academic environments required careful image management, that mentioning my working-class employment might create awkward social dynamics or professional concerns about his judgment and priorities. My actual circumstances were too complicated to explain briefly, he claimed, making strategic omission more appropriate than detailed honesty. But Tyler's discomfort with acknowledging my sacrifice revealed how completely he had internalized professional values that viewed working-class employment as evidence of personal limitation rather than economic necessity or romantic devotion. My comprehensive support had become source of shame rather than pride, liability rather than asset for his professional development. Tyler's senior year brought graduate school applications that required additional financial resources for application fees, GRE preparation, campus visits, and interview travel that would determine his post-graduation opportunities. The expenses were presented as final investment in our shared future, temporary costs that would yield permanent benefits once his advanced education led to high-paying career opportunities. But Tyler's graduate school plans assumed continued comprehensive support from me during additional years of education, extending the timeline for my own educational or career development indefinitely, while positioning his academic advancement as more important and valuable than any goals I might pursue independently. The conversation about Tyler's graduate school aspirations revealed how completely he had learned to view our relationship as arrangement where I provided support while he achieved individual success that would eventually benefit both of us through his earning potential rather than our mutual development and advancement. Tyler's research productivity during his senior year was exceptional, earning recognition through academic publications, conference presentations, and awards that were building his reputation within the engineering community. His success was generating excitement from graduate school programs and potential employers who saw him as promising candidate for advanced opportunities. But Tyler's academic achievements were creating social and professional connections that assumed background and resources I couldn't provide, making my continued presence in his life feel increasingly problematic rather than supportive. The gap between his academic world and my working reality was becoming unbridgeable rather than temporary. My own exhaustion was becoming severe enough to affect my work performance at both jobs, creating anxiety about potential employment loss that would make supporting Tyler's final year impossible, while simultaneously making my continued employment feel unsustainable given the physical and emotional toll. 3 years into Tyler's program, I was beginning to understand that my sacrifice had created permanent disparities rather than temporary accommodation, that my working-class identity was becoming obstacle to Tyler's professional advancement rather than foundation that had made such advancement possible. But Tyler was approaching graduation with excellent prospects for either graduate school or immediate employment in prestigious engineering positions that would provide the financial security and professional success we had worked toward together. The sacrifice felt justified when measured against his obvious achievements and the bright future his education would provide. Tyler would still express gratitude occasionally for my support, but the appreciation felt increasingly obligatory rather than genuine, delivered when he needed reassurance about continued funding rather than spontaneous recognition of ongoing sacrifice. I thought my working-class employment was temporary bridge to middle-class stability rather than permanent limitation on my potential and our relationship. I didn't understand that Tyler was learning to view my sacrifice as evidence of my limitations rather than proof of my love, that my support was becoming his shame rather than his foundation. Tyler's senior year brought job interviews with prestigious engineering firms that represented the culmination of everything my sacrifice had made possible, but his excitement about these career opportunities was overshadowed by anxiety about how my working-class background might affect his professional prospects if potential employers learned about our relationship dynamics. The woman who had funded his education was now a liability to be managed rather than a partner to be celebrated. The interview process for entry-level engineering positions was comprehensive and social, involving multiple rounds of technical assessments, behavioral interviews, and company events designed to evaluate candidates' cultural fit within professional environments that valued specific types of educational background and social sophistication. Tyler's academic record positioned him as a highly competitive candidate, but his personal circumstances created complications that required strategic management. Tyler's first major interview was with a consulting firm known for hiring graduates from elite universities and paying starting salaries that exceeded what I earned annually working 2 jobs. The interview process included a dinner reception where candidates were expected to bring their partners, an opportunity for companies to assess the social skills and professional presentation of potential employees' significant others. When Tyler explained the reception requirements, his discomfort with including me was obvious and painful, focusing on the importance of making excellent first impressions with people who would determine his career trajectory. The other candidates would likely be accompanied by fellow students or young professionals whose backgrounds would complement rather than complicate their partner's professional aspirations. Tyler's suggestion that I might want to skip the reception was presented as consideration for my comfort rather than concern about his professional image, but the subtext was clear. My presence at a high-stakes professional event could create awkward questions about my employment, education, and background that might reflect poorly on his judgment or social compatibility with company culture. The conversation about the reception revealed how thoroughly Tyler had learned to view our relationship through the lens of professional advancement rather than personal partnership, calculating the costs and benefits of acknowledging me in contexts where my working-class identity might threaten his opportunities. When I insisted on attending the reception to support Tyler during this crucial career moment, his response was immediate anxiety about managing potential complications rather than gratitude for my dedication to his success. He spent hours coaching me on appropriate conversation topics, professional etiquette, and strategies for deflecting questions about my employment or educational background. Tyler's instructions for the reception were detailed and humiliating, including suggestions about appropriate clothing, acceptable ways to describe my career transition, and topics to avoid that might reveal the extent of my sacrifice for his educational advancement. I was being prepared to perform a role rather than invited to share an authentic moment in our relationship. The reception itself was elegant and intimidating, filled with impeccably dressed young professionals who moved through sophisticated conversations about career goals, educational experiences, and cultural interests that assumed financial security and social capital I had never possessed. The other candidates' partners were articulate and polished, clearly comfortable in professional social environments. Tyler's introduction of me to company representatives and fellow candidates was strategically vague, describing me as someone who was exploring opportunities in education, rather than acknowledging that I had postponed my own education to work 2 jobs funding his degree. The lie was smooth and practiced, suggesting he had rehearsed this misrepresentation. When company representatives asked follow-up questions about my educational background or career interests, Tyler would redirect conversations toward his own achievements or technical subjects that excluded me from further participation. The strategy was effective for protecting his professional image, but left me feeling invisible and ashamed of the sacrifice that had made his presence at the reception possible. The most devastating moment of the evening came when a senior executive commented on how impressive it was that Tyler had managed to excel academically while being self-supporting through college, praising his independence and work ethic. Tyler accepted the compliment without correction, allowing the executive to believe that his success was entirely self-generated rather than enabled through external sacrifice. Tyler's willingness to accept credit for independence he had never possessed while I stood beside him was the clearest indication yet of how completely he had learned to view my contribution as obstacle rather than asset, something to be hidden rather than acknowledged. My comprehensive support had become his professional liability. The job offer that resulted from Tyler's successful interview process came with a starting salary that was nearly triple my combined income from both jobs, validating every sacrifice I had made while simultaneously highlighting the economic disparity that was threatening our relationship. His financial success would be immediate and substantial, built on educational achievement that existed only because of my comprehensive sacrifice. But Tyler's excitement about the job offer was tempered by concerns about the social expectations and professional networking requirements that would accompany his new role. The company culture emphasized relationship building and social events that would require partners who could contribute to rather than detract from professional advancement. Tyler's explanation of his new job's social requirements included detailed analysis of how my background might affect his professional development, presenting our relationship challenges as practical problems that needed strategic solutions rather than evidence of his ingratitude or character limitations. The solutions Tyler proposed for managing our relationship within his new professional context were comprehensive and devastating, including separate social circles, strategic omissions about my employment, and careful management of any contexts where his colleagues might encounter evidence of my working-class reality. Tyler's request that I consider evolving myself to match his new professional status was presented as opportunity for personal growth rather than demand that I fundamentally change my identity to accommodate his career advancement. He suggested that I might pursue education or career changes that would make our relationship more balanced and professionally appropriate. But Tyler's suggestions for my personal evolution ignored the practical constraints that made such changes impossible, including the educational debt I had avoided by working instead of attending college, the work experience that was entirely in service industries, and the time I had lost that couldn't be recovered through accelerated programs or career transitions. The conversation about evolving our relationship revealed Tyler's complete disconnection from the reality of my sacrifice and his assumption that I could somehow transcend the working-class identity that had resulted from funding his education. He wanted me to become someone different rather than acknowledging the value of who I had been. Tyler's new job required relocation to a major metropolitan area where the cost of living was significantly higher, but the professional opportunities were more extensive. The move was presented as advancement for both of us, but the practical implications were clearly more beneficial for his career than mine. The apartment Tyler selected in his new city was in a professional neighborhood where my service industry employment would seem out of place, and my lack of educational credentials would be obvious to neighbors and social contacts who assumed specific types of background and career trajectory among residents. Tyler's integration into his new professional environment was swift and successful, involving company social events, networking opportunities, and colleague relationships that excluded me either directly through scheduling conflicts with my work or indirectly through cultural assumptions about appropriate professional partnerships. The company culture Tyler joined valued specific types of social sophistication and educational background that made my presence at professional events feel inappropriate and uncomfortable for both of us. His colleagues' conversations assumed experiences and knowledge that were foreign to my working-class background. Tyler's colleagues were impressive and accomplished young professionals whose partners were typically fellow graduates from prestigious universities or successful professionals in complementary fields. The social dynamics assumed mutual career advancement and shared professional interests that our relationship couldn't provide. When Tyler's colleagues learned about our relationship, their responses were polite but confused, struggling to understand how someone with Tyler's educational background and career prospects had become involved with someone whose employment and aspirations seemed incompatible with his professional trajectory. Tyler's discomfort with these social dynamics was obvious but misdirected, focusing on my failure to fit into his professional environment rather than his failure to acknowledge the sacrifice that had made his professional success possible. He began suggesting that our relationship had run its course and that we might need to consider whether we were still compatible. The breakup conversation Tyler initiated was sophisticated and clinical, focusing on our different life trajectories and the importance of personal growth that might require pursuing separate paths. He avoided acknowledging that our different trajectories were direct result of my sacrifice for his benefit, that my limitations were consequences of funding his opportunities. Tyler's explanation for ending our relationship emphasized our lack of intellectual compatibility and the importance of partnering with someone who could contribute to rather than limit his professional advancement. He had learned to view my sacrifice as evidence of my inadequacy rather than proof of my devotion. The final conversation about our relationship was brief and definitive, with Tyler explaining that he needed to focus on building his career without complications that might limit his professional or social advancement. He wished me well in finding my own path, but couldn't continue accommodating someone whose background and circumstances were incompatible with his goals. Tyler's departure from our shared apartment was swift and efficient, removing his belongings while I was at work to avoid emotional complications that might affect his professional transition. He left behind furniture and household items that he no longer needed, but had been purchased with money from my employment. Standing in the apartment that I could no longer afford without Tyler's promised financial contribution, surrounded by possessions that represented years of my labor and sacrifice, I finally understood the complete scope of what had happened. I had funded someone's individual success while ensuring my own permanent disadvantage, enabling someone whose gratitude had an expiration date that coincided with his professional advancement. Tyler's engineering degree existed because I had worked 70-hour weeks for 3 years, but his success now required forgetting that foundation. The woman who had sacrificed her scholarship to fund his education had become the limitation he needed to overcome to feel truly successful. Tyler's graduation and immediate entry into his high-paying engineering role represented the successful culmination of everything my sacrifice had made possible. But his transition from grateful student to independent professional was accompanied by systematic erasure of my role in his achievement and growing resentment about the holding back he claimed our relationship had done to his career advancement. The foundation I had provided was being reconstructed as the obstacle he had overcome through superior judgment and determination. Tyler's starting salary as a junior engineer was $68,000 annually, more than double what I earned working 70 hours per week at 2 jobs, creating an immediate economic disparity that highlighted the permanent consequences of my educational sacrifice. His financial security was built on my continued economic vulnerability, success that required forgetting the comprehensive support that had made it possible. The apartment Tyler rented in his new city was a modern one-bedroom in a professional complex where residents were young engineers, consultants, and other recent graduates whose careers were launching into middle-class prosperity. The monthly rent exceeded my entire income, representing lifestyle advancement that would have been impossible without the educational foundation I had funded through years of exhaustive employment. Tyler's new colleagues were impressive and ambitious young professionals whose conversations assumed educational background and career prospects that made my working-class employment seem temporary and embarrassing rather than essential and admirable. Their social gatherings included dinner parties, professional networking events, and cultural activities that required financial resources and social sophistication I couldn't provide. But Tyler's integration into this professional environment required strategic management of his personal history, including careful omission of the comprehensive support that had enabled his academic success. Acknowledging that his education had been funded through someone else's sacrifice would have undermined perceptions of his independence and self-reliance that were valued among competitive young professionals. Tyler's new narrative about his college experience emphasized his individual achievement, academic excellence, and strategic career planning that had positioned him for immediate professional success. The story was inspiring and impressive, describing someone who had overcome financial challenges through determination and academic merit rather than external assistance. The girlfriend who had worked 2 jobs to fund Tyler's education was systematically edited out of his professional biography, replaced with vague references to part-time work and financial aid that suggested independence rather than dependency. My comprehensive sacrifice became his evidence of resourcefulness and self-reliance. Tyler's social media presence during this period reflected his professional advancement and personal satisfaction, featuring photos of his new apartment, workplace achievements, and social activities with colleagues who represented the kind of sophisticated professional network he was building. The posts suggested someone whose success was entirely self-generated. But the most devastating aspect of Tyler's professional success was how quickly he developed social connections that assumed romantic availability, with female colleagues and social contacts who were clearly interested in dating someone with his education, career prospects, and apparent independence from complicated personal relationships. Tyler's description of our breakup to his new social circle positioned our relationship as learning experience that had taught him important lessons about compatibility and the importance of partnering with someone who could contribute to rather than limit professional advancement. I had become his cautionary tale about the dangers of settling for someone without ambition. The characterization of me as lacking ambition was particularly cruel because it inverted the reality of our relationship, transforming my comprehensive sacrifice into evidence of personal limitation rather than romantic devotion. Tyler had learned to view my working-class employment as choice rather than consequence of funding his education. Tyler's new girlfriend appeared within months of our breakup, a fellow engineer whose educational background and career prospects complemented his own professional trajectory perfectly. Their relationship was built on mutual advancement and shared goals rather than sacrifice and support, representing the kind of partnership that enhanced rather than complicated professional development. The contrast between Tyler's new relationship and our previous arrangement was stark and obviously intentional. Where I had been someone whose background required strategic management, she was someone whose credentials enhanced his professional image. Where I had needed accommodation and concealment, she provided networking opportunities and social validation. Tyler's social media posts featuring his new girlfriend showed someone who was polished, educated, and clearly comfortable in professional environments that had made me feel inadequate and out of place. Their relationship appeared effortless and balanced, mutual support between equals rather than comprehensive sacrifice from one person to another. But Tyler's professional advancement was creating additional opportunities that built on the foundation I had provided while systematically erasing evidence that such foundation had existed. Promotions, recognition, and career development that resulted from his excellent educational preparation were attributed to individual merit rather than collaborative achievement. Tyler's expertise in his engineering field was genuine and valuable, developed through academic opportunities that had been made possible by my financial support, but now presented as evidence of his individual talent and determination. His technical knowledge was real, but its foundation was systematically concealed to protect his professional narrative. The professional recognition Tyler received for his work included awards, publications, and speaking opportunities that were building his reputation within the engineering community. His success was inspiring and deserved based on his current performance, but it was achievement that existed only because someone else had absorbed the financial costs of his education. Tyler's graduate school plans, which he was now pursuing part-time while working, were funded through his engineering salary and employer tuition assistance rather than external sacrifice. His advanced education was presented as evidence of continued professional development rather than acknowledgement that his undergraduate education had required comprehensive external support. The irony of Tyler's financial ability to pursue graduate education independently was that such ability existed only because I had prevented the educational debt that would have made continued education unaffordable. My sacrifice had created the financial freedom he was now using to advance his career without acknowledging the foundation that made such advancement possible. Tyler's professional networking included connections with senior engineers, industry leaders, and academic researchers who were impressed by his educational background and early career achievements. These relationships were valuable for his continued advancement, but they were built on presentation of himself as self-made rather than externally supported. My own career prospects remained limited by the educational opportunities I had abandoned to fund Tyler's advancement, creating permanent barriers to professional development that affected every aspect of my economic and social potential. The service industry employment that had funded his education was becoming permanent limitation rather than temporary sacrifice. The financial debt I had avoided by working instead of attending college was now impossible to address through traditional educational financing because my employment history and current income made student loans unaffordable. The opportunity cost of my sacrifice was becoming permanent rather than temporary disadvantage. But the most devastating consequence was the social isolation that resulted from Tyler's systematic erasure of our relationship from his professional narrative. Mutual friends who knew about my sacrifice were subtly discouraged from mentioning our history, leaving me unable to discuss the most significant charitable work I had ever undertaken. Tyler's success story was becoming locally celebrated within professional and social circles that saw him as an inspiring example of academic achievement and early career advancement. His transformation from college student to successful engineer was admirable and impressive, but it was a story that excluded the person who had made transformation possible. The speaking engagements Tyler began accepting at his former university included presentations about career planning, professional development, and the importance of academic excellence for engineering success. His advice to current students emphasized individual responsibility and strategic planning rather than acknowledging external support systems. Tyler's presentations to engineering students included warnings about maintaining focus on academic and professional goals despite personal relationships that might create distractions or complications. According to his analysis, successful students needed to prioritize their education over romantic commitments that could compromise long-term career prospects. The advice was technically sound but personally devastating, delivered by someone whose education had been entirely funded by romantic commitment he was now warning others to avoid. Tyler was teaching students to recognize and resist the kind of comprehensive support that had enabled his own success. Tyler's professional success was generating increasing recognition and advancement opportunities that validated his narrative about individual achievement while making my actual contributions seem increasingly implausible. His obvious competence and independence made claims about previous comprehensive dependency appear exaggerated or false. The woman who had worked 70 hours per week to fund Tyler's education was becoming invisible in the story of his professional advancement, erased from his biography as thoroughly as if our relationship had never existed. My sacrifice was being rewritten as his achievement, my love as his limitation, my devotion as his burden. Tyler's engagement to his fellow engineer was announced in the local newspaper's business section, celebrating the union of two successful young professionals whose shared commitment to engineering excellence and career advancement made them role models for ambitious couples. Their relationship represented healthy partnership between equals rather than unbalanced arrangement requiring sacrifice. Standing outside the engineering firm where Tyler worked, reading about his engagement in the newspaper, I finally understood that some people's success requires permanent amnesia about those who made success possible. Tyler's professional advancement demanded forgetting me entirely, transforming my sacrifice into his strength, my love into his liberation, my support into his independence. The man who had promised that my temporary sacrifice would yield permanent benefits for both of us had achieved permanent success that required my permanent invisibility. My investment in our shared future had become his individual triumph, purchased through comprehensive sacrifice that had to be forgotten for the success to feel genuine. Tyler's story of self-made achievement was inspiring and professionally valuable, but it was fiction that required my continued existence as someone without ambition, rather than acknowledgement that his ambition had been funded through my sacrifice. 2 years after Tyler's graduation, his engineering career had reached levels of recognition and advancement that transformed him into a local success story, while my sacrifice was systematically erased from every account of his achievement, replaced with narratives about individual determination and strategic career planning that positioned me as the limitation he had wisely overcome rather than the foundation that had made his success possible. Tyler's promotion to senior engineer at age 25 was featured in the local business journal as an example of exceptional early career advancement, with articles celebrating his technical expertise, leadership potential, and the kind of focused ambition that made him a role model for other young professionals. The coverage described someone whose success was entirely self-generated through talent and strategic decision-making. The business profile included biographical information about Tyler's educational background and career trajectory, describing his academic excellence and immediate transition into professional success without any reference to external support or assistance that had made such achievement possible. His story was presented as inspiration for other young people about what could be accomplished through individual effort and determination. Tyler's speaking engagements had expanded beyond university presentations to include corporate leadership conferences, professional development seminars, and career planning workshops where his personal story provided compelling evidence for the importance of educational investment and strategic career planning. His expertise was sought by organizations developing programs for young professionals. But Tyler's presentations about career success included specific warnings about personal relationships that might compromise professional advancement, advice about maintaining focus on individual goals despite social pressures to accommodate partners who might not share similar ambitions or educational backgrounds. His analysis was technically accurate but personally cruel, delivered by someone whose education had been entirely enabled through accommodation he was now warning others to avoid. Tyler's professional networking had expanded to include senior executives, industry leaders, and board members who were impressed by his rapid advancement and leadership potential. These relationships were valuable for his continued career development, providing mentorship and opportunities that were accelerating his professional trajectory beyond typical timelines. The recognition Tyler received from industry leaders was accompanied by increasing social status and financial rewards that were building wealth and professional reputation far beyond what either of us had imagined possible during his college years. His success was substantial and meaningful, validating every sacrifice I had made while simultaneously making that sacrifice invisible. Tyler's engagement to Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a fellow engineer with a PhD from MIT and impressive research background, was covered extensively in professional publications as an example of power couple potential within the engineering community. Their combined credentials and career prospects made them influential within their professional networks and socially prominent within their metropolitan area. Sarah's background perfectly complemented Tyler's professional aspirations in ways that my working-class employment never could have provided. Her prestigious education, research publications, and family connections in academic and professional circles enhanced rather than threatened his reputation, providing social validation and networking opportunities that supported continued advancement. The contrast between Sarah's contribution to Tyler's career and my supposed detraction from it had become part of his narrative about personal growth and improved decision-making in relationships. His marriage was evidence of his ability to choose supportive partners rather than limiting ones, proof that he had learned important lessons from previous involvement with someone whose background created complications. Tyler's wedding announcement in the society pages described a celebration of two accomplished professionals whose shared commitment to engineering excellence and career advancement made them an inspiring example of successful partnership between equals. The description emphasized their individual achievements and mutual support rather than acknowledging any external assistance that had enabled such accomplishments. But Tyler's professional success was creating opportunities for giving back to the educational institutions and programs that had supposedly enabled his achievement, with charitable contributions and volunteer work that were building his reputation as someone committed to helping others achieve similar success through individual effort and determination. Tyler's scholarship fund at his former university was established to support engineering students who demonstrated academic excellence and leadership potential, providing financial assistance for students whose backgrounds might otherwise prevent them from pursuing engineering education. The scholarship was generous and meaningful, helping students who faced similar financial challenges to those Tyler claimed to have overcome independently. The irony of Tyler funding educational opportunities for other students while systematically erasing the person who had funded his own education was profound, but invisible to beneficiaries and supporters who saw only his current generosity rather than understanding the foundation that had made such generosity possible. Tyler's scholarship recipients were selected based on academic merit and financial need, criteria that would have made me eligible for similar support if such programs had been available during my high school years. The students Tyler was helping faced circumstances similar to those I had experienced, but they were receiving assistance he had been unable to acknowledge receiving himself. My own financial situation 2 years after Tyler's graduation remained constrained by the educational opportunities I had abandoned and the work experience that was entirely in service industries, creating ongoing barriers to career advancement that affected every aspect of my economic and social prospects. The sacrifice I had made was producing permanent rather than temporary consequences. The service industry management positions I had been able to secure provided modest income increases, but no prospect for significant career advancement or financial security that might have compensated for the educational opportunities I had lost. My work experience was valuable within limited contexts, but didn't translate to professional environments that required educational credentials. Returning to school part-time while working full-time was financially and logistically challenging, requiring student loans that would be difficult to repay given my limited earning potential and time commitments that made academic success uncertain. The educational debt I had avoided by working to support Tyler was now unavoidable if I wanted to pursue delayed career goals. But the most profound consequence was the social isolation that resulted from Tyler's narrative about our relationship being holding him back from achieving his potential. Mutual friends who had witnessed my sacrifice were influenced by his version of events to view me as someone whose lack of ambition had created problems for someone trying to advance professionally. Tyler's characterization of our relationship as learning experience about the importance of partnering with ambitious people had become accepted wisdom among friends and family who admired his professional success while viewing my continued working-class employment as evidence that his assessment of our incompatibility had been accurate. The narrative Tyler had constructed about our relationship served multiple psychological functions that made it more appealing than acknowledging the reality of my comprehensive sacrifice. Casting me as limitation allowed him to avoid examining his own ingratitude, justified his abandonment of someone who had loved him, and positioned his success as evidence of good judgment rather than enabled privilege. Tyler's success story was being used by career counselors, professional development programs, and educational institutions as example of what could be accomplished through strategic planning and focused ambition. His biography had become inspirational template for other young people about the importance of educational investment and career prioritization. But Tyler's advice to young professionals included specific warnings about relationships that might compromise career advancement, guidance about maintaining focus on individual goals despite social pressures to accommodate partners whose ambitions might not align with professional success. He was teaching others to avoid the kind of sacrifice that had enabled his own achievement. The corporate consulting work Tyler had begun offered strategic planning services to other young professionals navigating early career decisions, with particular expertise in balancing personal relationships with professional advancement. His insights were valued because they appeared to be based on successful navigation of similar challenges. Tyler's consulting practice was built on expertise derived from having successfully managed the transition from college student to professional engineer while maintaining appropriate boundaries with personal relationships that might have compromised career development. His authority to advise others was based on narrative of individual success that excluded collaborative elements. The most devastating aspect of Tyler's continued success was how it validated the narrative he had constructed while making my actual role seem increasingly implausible to people who knew only his current achievements. His obvious competence and independence made claims about previous comprehensive dependency appear exaggerated or fabricated. Tyler's professional reputation was built on perception of him as someone who had achieved success through individual merit and strategic decision-making, someone whose character and judgment could be trusted based on his track record of excellent choices and focused ambition. Acknowledging comprehensive external support would have undermined this carefully constructed professional identity. 2 years after Tyler's graduation, I was watching someone whose career I had made possible receive recognition for achievements that existed only because of sacrifice he had systematically erased from his personal and professional narrative. The foundation I had provided was being remembered as the obstacle he had overcome through superior judgment. Tyler's marriage to Sarah was being celebrated as evidence of his growth and improved decision-making in relationships, proof that he had learned to choose partners who enhanced rather than limited his professional advancement. Their partnership represented healthy collaboration between equals rather than unbalanced sacrifice from one person to another. The man who had promised that my temporary sacrifice would yield permanent benefits for both of us had achieved permanent success that required permanent amnesia about the person who had made success possible. His professional advancement demanded forgetting me entirely, transforming my sacrifice into his strength. Standing outside the engineering conference where Tyler was delivering a keynote presentation about early career success, I understood that some people's achievements require erasing those who made achievement possible, that professional advancement sometimes demands systematic historical revision that transforms supporters into obstacles. Tyler's story of ambitious achievement was inspiring and professionally valuable, but it was fiction that required my continued existence as someone without ambition, rather than acknowledgement that his ambition had been purchased through my sacrifice. The ambitious man had forgotten his foundation, rewriting history to make his success feel entirely deserved. I still have the acceptance letter from the college where I was offered a full scholarship, the envelope worn from handling over the years, but the words still crisp on university letterhead. We are pleased to offer you admission with full academic scholarship based on your exceptional academic achievement and demonstrated potential. Sometimes I read it and try to imagine the person I would have become if I had chosen my own dreams over Tyler's, what career I might have built, what contributions I might have made to the world if I hadn't sacrificed my potential to build someone else's foundation. 5 years have passed since I sacrificed my education to work 2 jobs for Tyler's engineering degree, and the ripple effects of that choice continue to shape every aspect of my life, while Tyler's success story has become completely detached from the sacrifice that made it possible. The woman who funded his ambition has been erased from his biography as thoroughly as if I had never existed, replaced with narratives about individual determination and strategic planning that position him as entirely self-made. Tyler's professional achievements continue to accumulate at an impressive pace. Recent promotion to engineering director at age 28, published research papers in prestigious technical journals, speaking engagements at national conferences where his expertise is sought by industry leaders. Each success builds on the educational foundation I provided while requiring continued amnesia about how that foundation was created, systematic historical revision that transforms collaborative achievement into individual triumph. The company where Tyler works has featured him in their annual report as an example of exceptional young talent, with biographical information that describes his rapid advancement through technical excellence and leadership potential. The profile mentions his academic achievements and early career success without any reference to external support or assistance that made such achievement possible, presenting someone whose success story is entirely self-generated. Tyler's expertise in specialized engineering applications has made him a consultant for government projects and private sector initiatives that require his particular combination of technical knowledge and strategic thinking. His professional reputation extends beyond his immediate industry to include recognition from academic institutions and policy organizations that value his insights. But the most painful aspect of Tyler's success is not his ingratitude, which I now understand was probably inevitable, but the complete transformation of my sacrifice into evidence of my limitations. The woman who worked 70 hours per week to fund someone else's dreams is now remembered as someone without ambition who nearly derailed his career through her lack of vision and drive. Tyler's narrative about our relationship has become more sophisticated over time, incorporating professional development concepts about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who share your ambitions and support your growth. According to his current version of events, I was someone who couldn't envision or support the kind of success he was capable of achieving, someone whose limited perspective created obstacles to his professional advancement. The psychological reversal is complete and apparently permanent. Tyler has convinced himself that ending our relationship was necessary for his professional development, that my working-class background and limited educational credentials would have prevented him from reaching his full potential. My sacrifice has been reframed as the limitation he overcame through superior judgment and strategic decision-making. Tyler's speaking engagements now include presentations about work-life balance and the importance of choosing partners who enhance rather than limit professional growth. His advice to young professionals emphasizes the necessity of surrounding yourself with people who share your ambitions and can contribute to your success rather than creating obstacles or complications. The irony of Tyler advising others about relationship choices while systematically erasing the relationship that enabled his success is profound, but invisible to audiences who accept his narrative as complete and accurate. He is teaching others to avoid the kind of comprehensive sacrifice that made his own achievement possible, warning against the very support that saved his career. Tyler's marriage to Sarah continues to be held up as example of successful professional partnership, with their combined expertise and networking abilities creating opportunities that benefit both their careers. Their relationship represents healthy collaboration between equals rather than unbalanced sacrifice from one person to another, mutual advancement rather than individual achievement enabled through external support. The contrast between Tyler's current marriage and our previous relationship has become part of his professional narrative about personal growth and improved decision-making. His ability to choose an appropriate partner is evidence of his maturity and strategic thinking, proof that he has learned important lessons about compatibility and mutual support. But perhaps the most important lesson I've learned is understanding the difference between supporting someone's dreams and surrendering your own dreams to become the foundation for someone else's ambition. True partnership involves mutual sacrifice and shared advancement, not systematic elimination of one person's potential to enable another's success. The career path I eventually found after years of working-class employment was in nonprofit administration, helping other people navigate educational and professional obstacles similar to those I had experienced. The work is meaningful and uses skills I developed through adversity, but it's also a constant reminder of opportunities I lost and potential I never explored during the years I spent funding Tyler's advancement. My role as program coordinator for a college access nonprofit allows me to counsel high school students about educational opportunities and financial planning, helping them avoid the kind of choices I made that sacrificed individual potential for relationship obligations. The work is personally satisfying because it helps prevent other young women from making similar mistakes. The students I counsel often face similar decisions about balancing romantic relationships with educational goals, particularly young women whose boyfriends express need for support during college or career transitions. My experience with Tyler has made me sensitive to relationship dynamics that might compromise educational advancement, and I encourage students to prioritize their own development rather than sacrificing for partners who might not appreciate such sacrifice. My own educational journey finally began at age 27, funded through student loans and completed through night classes while working full-time at the nonprofit. The degree I earned was in social work rather than education, shaped by experiences Tyler's ambition had forced me to accumulate rather than chosen through natural interest and aptitude. The process of returning to school in my late 20s was challenging in ways that undergraduate education immediately after high school wouldn't have been. Balancing full-time work with academic requirements required time management skills and discipline that I had developed through years of working multiple jobs, but it also meant competing with younger students who had advantages I lacked. The student debt I accumulated returning to school was substantial and necessary, representing the educational financing I had avoided by working to support Tyler, but now needed to pursue delayed career goals. The financial burden will follow me for years, affecting my ability to save for major purchases or build long-term financial security, but it's the price of reclaiming educational opportunities I sacrificed for someone else's benefit. But completing my degree provided psychological validation that was more valuable than financial advancement, proof that my academic potential had been real despite Tyler's eventual characterization of me as someone without ambition or intellectual capability. The academic success I achieved while working full-time demonstrated that my sacrifice for Tyler had been choice rather than limitation. Dating has been complicated by the psychological impact of having comprehensive sacrifice not just unappreciated, but actively resented by someone I loved. Learning to distinguish between partners who want support and partners who want to be supported has been crucial for protecting myself from similar exploitation while remaining open to genuine partnership. The few serious relationships I attempted in the years after Tyler were affected by my hypervigilance about reciprocity and balance, my tendency to interpret any request for support as potential manipulation or exploitation. The trauma of having love weaponized to justify unlimited sacrifice made normal relationship compromises feel threatening and dangerous. But the relationship I eventually developed into marriage was with someone who understood the value of mutual sacrifice and shared advancement, who could appreciate rather than resent comprehensive support during difficult periods. His own experience with family sacrifice for educational goals made him sensitive to the dynamics I had navigated with Tyler. My husband David's respect for my working-class background and the strength it demonstrated was healing after years of having that background treated as limitation rather than asset. He could see that my willingness to sacrifice for Tyler's education revealed character rather than lack of ambition, love rather than weakness, strength rather than inadequacy. David's career as a social worker complemented rather than competed with my nonprofit work, creating relationship dynamics based on shared values and mutual support rather than individual advancement at the other person's expense. Our partnership involves collaborative decision-making about career opportunities, educational goals, and financial planning that benefits both of us rather than systematically advantaging one person over another. The financial planning David and I do together includes explicit discussion about educational goals, career advancement opportunities, and the importance of maintaining individual potential while supporting shared objectives. We learned from my experience with Tyler that healthy relationships require boundaries around sacrifice, that love doesn't mean unlimited availability for someone else's advancement. But the most profound change has been understanding that true ambition sometimes means recognizing when someone else's success will cost you everything, when supporting someone's dreams requires abandoning your own potential, when love is being weaponized to justify unlimited sacrifice that benefits only the person receiving it. The friends and family who witnessed my sacrifice have mixed reactions to Tyler's success and my continued financial limitations. Some view him as ungrateful opportunist who exploited my devotion for his individual advancement, while others see his assessment of our incompatibility as accurate given our different outcomes and life trajectories. The truth probably contains elements of both perspectives. My sister Emma has been particularly vocal about Tyler's ingratitude and the unfairness of how our sacrifice was rewarded, pointing out that his success exists only because I prevented the educational debt that would have made his career advancement impossible. She can see the direct connection between my sacrifice and his achievement, the causal relationship that Tyler has systematically erased from his narrative. But Emma's anger on my behalf, while validating, doesn't change the practical consequences of choices I made or the permanent impact those choices have had on my financial and professional prospects. Tyler's ingratitude is real and painful, but focusing on it prevents acknowledgement of my own agency in creating the situation and learning from it for future decisions. Tyler's charitable work now includes mentoring young engineers and providing scholarship support for students facing financial obstacles to engineering education. His generosity is genuine and meaningful, helping students overcome barriers similar to those he claims to have overcome independently, but the irony of him helping others achieve what he achieved only through my sacrifice is profound and invisible to beneficiaries. The scholarship Tyler established at his former university provides full tuition support for engineering students who demonstrate academic excellence despite financial hardship, creating opportunities for students whose circumstances mirror those Tyler faced during college. The students who benefit from his scholarship receive the kind of support he received from me but couldn't acknowledge accepting. Tyler's mentoring of young professionals includes advice about career planning, professional development, and the importance of maintaining focus on individual goals despite personal relationships that might create complications or distractions. He teaches others to prioritize their advancement over romantic obligations, advice that reflects lessons he learned from our relationship, but presents those lessons as wisdom rather than ingratitude. I don't regret the choice to support Tyler during his education. He was someone I loved who needed help achieving dreams that seemed important and attainable through collaborative effort. The mistake was not understanding that some people interpret comprehensive support as evidence of the supporter's limitations rather than proof of their devotion, that sacrifice can create resentment rather than gratitude. The scholarship letter I still keep reminds me not of opportunities lost, but of potential that existed, ambition that was real even if it was redirected toward someone else's advancement. My willingness to sacrifice demonstrated ambition rather than lack of it, the ambition to believe in someone else's dreams, even at the cost of my own development. But I learned that the most ambitious thing you can do is sometimes protecting your own potential from people who would consume it without appreciation. recognizing when love requires boundaries rather than unlimited sacrifice, understanding that supporting someone's dreams shouldn't require abandoning your own prospects or accepting permanent disadvantage. Tyler's success is real and valuable, built on educational opportunities I made possible, but sustained through talent and effort that belong to him. His achievement helps clients, colleagues, and students who benefit from his expertise, making my sacrifice meaningful even if it's unacknowledged and systematically erased from his professional narrative. The engineering projects Tyler leads contribute to infrastructure development, environmental solutions, and technological advancement that benefit society beyond our personal relationship and its aftermath. The foundation I provided enabled contributions that have value extending far beyond the individual cost I paid, creating positive impact that justifies much of what I invested. But the personal cost was higher than anticipated, and the psychological damage more lasting than I expected when I made the initial choice to sacrifice my scholarship for Tyler's benefit. The permanent nature of educational opportunities and the compound effects of early career decisions weren't fully apparent to an 18-year-old making choices based on love rather than strategic planning. Standing outside the university where Tyler received his degree, looking at the engineering building where he once studied with my financial support, I understand that some people's success requires forgetting those who made it possible. Tyler needed to believe he was self-made to feel proud of his achievements, needed to forget being supported to feel strong and independent. My ambition built someone else's dreams, and perhaps that's enough even if it was never acknowledged or appreciated. Sometimes the most ambitious thing is believing in someone else's potential, even when that person eventually needs to forget your belief to feel successful, even when your sacrifice becomes their shame rather than their gratitude. The woman who gave up her scholarship to work 2 jobs has learned that true ambition sometimes means protecting your dreams from people who would use them as building materials for their own success. But she has also learned that love, even unappreciated love, can create value in the world through the achievements it enables, even if those achievements require forgetting the love that made them possible.